technological proficiency in this period, this gold bracelet was found at Dur-Kure Galzu. And you can see here that in addition to just being a lovely design, these individual small droplets of gold make up the lozenge pattern that goes around this bracelet. So this bracelet uses a whole bunch of different techniques, including filigree, impressing, but this granulation, this ability to create individual little drops of gold and use it for decoration, it's incredibly difficult to do, very, very hard to do. So these pieces, again, fit into this general international system of exchange, right? This would have been one of these international pieces that would have been recognized by the kings of Amarna, the kings of Assyria, of Babylon. And we know that craftsmen from Egypt, from Assyria and Babylon would actually travel from palace to palace, creating objects like this. So very much so we see that Babylon is tied into this system. In fact, not just craftsmen, but even gods themselves. When the king of Egypt, Amenhotep III, was sick, the kings of Babylon actually sent gods to him, Mitanni as well, for his health. So these cult statues would actually travel almost like ambassadors. So again, underscoring that internationalism that characterizes the Late Bronze Age. Another feature that's unique to the Kassite period in Babylon are the use of these stelae. I hesitate to call them stelae because they're more like carved boulders. These are called kuduru, and they first appeared during the time of Kassite rule in Babylon, and they continue all the way into the late Assyrian period, around 600 BC. The name actually comes from Akkadian. It refers to the word for borders. And it's this these objects are very unusual in their use of text and image. Although image is probably not the most dominant part, really these things are covered with inscriptions along the backside. What they appear to be are land grants given by the Kassite king to members of the royal family, to temple officials, priests, to military officers and generals, courtiers and whatnot. These were probably set up in the temple. Again, there might have been two of them. There are references that kudurus are made in pairs, with one that's set up in the temple for everyone to see, and another one that was probably less fancy, set up actually out on the land itself, marking ownership and who has rights to what. And really what this does is it specifies the relationship between the recipient and the king. These land grants really played less of an economic role probably, but were more of a means of tying people to the king through loyalties. So not only is the king establishing his own dominance, these Kassite kings, but also individuals, right, are literally written in stone. Their relationship to the king is enshrined. So it's a system of ensuring loyalty. Generally, these kudurus have a presentation scene. We see again in these examples lots of divine symbols, these abstract divine symbols of the goddess or the god Sin, Shamash, Inanna, used to depict the gods. In this really interesting example, all of these are from Susa, by the way, and we'll get to Susa in a second and why that's important. But these examples were found in Susa, and we see, for example, this one which is made out of white limestone, using a series of registers, in which it's really interesting. The procession here mainly consists of animals, mythological animals, and musicians. And we see almost a stylized fort with its parapets and its crenellations being surrounded by a snake on this side. The kuduru, again, we have two other examples here, one from the reign of Melishishu, in which the inscription, as you can see, which would have identified who this kuduru was for and the relationship with the king, it's been effaced. You can see it's been scratched off here almost entirely. This probably took place when these Kedus were taken from Babylon and brought to Susa. These objects were taken as war booty because, again, in the 12th century, we start seeing the collapse of these major powers, right? With the Sea Peoples, right? We talked about Egypt, with the Hittites, the Sea Peoples as well, the collapse of their main capital at Hattusas. Assyria survives, it's in the heartland, but around the 12th century we see the collapse of Babylon. And if it's not going to be Sea Peoples, who are going to be the main suspects? If Babylon's going to collapse, who are you worried about actually sacking Babylon? Yeah. Mountain people, exactly, right? Mountain people, Lulubis, people from the east, particularly Elamites. So this happens in the 12th century. The Kassites lose control, and the Elamites attack from their strongholds at Susa, Anshan, and around this time we see the rise of an Elamite state, which begins, although it comes at the very end of the Late Bronze Age, becomes prominent and starts participating in this international system. We've just to kind of recap. We haven't talked about Elam for a while, right? We talked about this is the same Elam, that we saw founded around 4000 BC, Susa 1, Susa 2 period, right? If you remember the Uruk influence we talked about, and really Susa returns to the orbit of Mesopotamia around after breaking away around 2800. It's conquered by the Akkadians around 2000. We see a real strong sense of an Elamite dynasty emerging in Anshan. And by the 14th century, again, the Elamite dynasty in Anshan is founded under King Untash-Napir Shah. His name's right up there. And when founding a new dynasty, what are you going to do? Again, right? Same thing that these other kings are going to do. Untash-Napir Shah, in order to establish a new Elamite dynasty, that again is this renaissance of Elamite culture now that they're taking over Babylon. He founds a new city and he names it after himself. Untash-Napir Shah creates Al-Untash-Napir Shah, also known as Choga Zambil, and really again we see the same pattern continuing, right? 4 kings from the late Bronze II, from 4 very different places, all founding new cities in which to administer this their kingdoms. The plan of Choga Zambil, or Al-Untash-Napir Shah, it's about 40 kilometers southeast of Susa, so not too far away from the traditional centers of power, just like Kartakulti-Ninurta, just like Dur-Kuregalzu, always kind of within a day's ride or so of the main centers. This site was excavated in the 1950s, and you can see here it's a city that's enclosed with triple walls. It's very, very well fortified. A main outer wall with a second inner wall that separates out what seems to be a religious complex, and then a final third wall surrounding the central ziggurat, this massive, massive structure we'll talk about in a second. The ziggurat itself is about 67 meters. It's got this square base, and it's preserved to a height of around 28 meters. And it's set in this enclosure, which was dedicated to multiple Elamite gods. Should mention too that unlike the Kassites, who adopted Babylonian gods and worshipped these gods like Marduk, like Inanna, these gods that we're familiar with, the Elamites had their own pantheon of gods. This ziggurat was actually dedicated to the Elamite city god, the patron god of Susa, named Inshushinak. And it's an interesting structure in the sense that when it was first built, it consisted solely of a series of buildings that were built around an outer courtyard. The outer courtyard, or the inner courtyard, was the sunken courtyard that was similar to a caravanserai, a trading post where you would have a central area where trade would take place, and also people moving through the region with goods could not only sell those goods but also use it as a transit point. This is adopted and changed into a ziggurat slowly over time. We see a series of 2 temples being used there, not just to in Shushanak, this Elamite god, but also his consort, excuse me. It's the end of the week. I'm a little out of it. My apologies. And I lost my place. So again, moving from the central courtyard to really 2 separate temples dedicated to 2 main gods. The god in Shushanak, this Elamite city god, and then another city god, the patron god of Anshan, the goddess Napirisha. So this courtyard structure served as the first level for what later would become a 5-level ziggurat with a temple on top of it. And this is a really fascinating structure for a number of reasons. First off, it's just gigantic. It's huge. It's built with millions of bricks, literally millions of sun-dried bricks at its core. And on the outside, it had a shell of baked brick. So the effort going into building this is just completely fantastic. And in terms of, the progression of ziggurat styles, right? We've seen a few different types, right? In Assyria, we saw double ziggurats. We've seen ziggurats at Dur-Kurigalzu, where temples are affixed to the front. In this case, the ziggurat at Choga Zambil has a temple that is on the top, similar to our kind of earliest ziggurat at Ur. But this time, instead of being approached by external staircases, you can see here, in what again is highly reconstructed, and also in this plan, that to get to the top, you would actually use internal staircases. So these staircases are actually carved into the ziggurat itself, emerging at different points, letting you get to the top without being outside. So another really interesting development in the sort of cycle of, or the evolution of the ziggurat. Also, objects from this site. We find this is a statue of Napir Asu, who is the wife of Untash Napirsha. And this is really an exceptional piece for a number of reasons. It's huge for one thing. This is almost 5 feet tall and weighs over 3,500 pounds. That's because it's made with this very unusual technique. You can kind of see it here. The outside is made of bronze, and it's actually made in a lost wax casting technique, the one that we also talked about as early as the Akkadian period. That said, it's built over a bronze core, and you can see that here, which just again gives this its weight and stability. The technique is really fantastic, and the attention paid to, again, the physicality of the form, and this skirt, which has an inscription in Elamite identifying the queen, and also a series of prayers saying that the statue should, again, represent her in the temple, and that the gods should protect the statue in turn. More bronze work from Susa and from Elam. This is a very interesting piece that is, again, from this period. And it's known as a Sit Shamshi. We call it a Sit Shamshi because the inscription on it, the son of Shutruk Nahute, says that he dedicated this Sit Shamshi to the temple. And really what that translates to is a bronze sunrise. Again, we're not really clear why this is a bronze sunrise.